of that. That group's officially over there. They still dot line to DMS, and we're still pretty heavily involved. But just want to give you that update. One of the things Marianne alluded to was an RFP is on the street now for natural infrastructure flood mitigation projects, and that is being funded from the blueprint. The blueprint got $96 million originally. That once we completed the draft blueprint, which is how do you do water flood resiliency planning in the state of North Carolina, coming up with that strategy. Once that was completed, which was last December, we can start spending $96 million on projects selected through that process. Now, one of the things we have in the blueprint program is we developed a flood resiliency tool that helps local governments, state governments, anybody identify the best projects for their area. And we're also developing river basin action strategies, which are watershed plans for each river basin. They end up with identifying and prioritize projects for those river basins. That is not complete yet. The drafts will be complete this summer. I think all our modeling is updated, but it's not all in the tool yet. We expanded 2D modeling, working with emergency management all the way up in the watershed, and updated forecasted flooding 100, 200, whatever. So anyway, that's all getting updated. What we did the way we selected projects so far was we ran through the same selection process we would have in the draft blueprint, like these are things to prioritize and how. We looked at all the watershed, the flood plans, watershed plans, hazard mitigation plans in each of the 6 river basins where we're authorized to spend that money. And we worked with locals and state entities, and we've either gap funded or completely funded projects throughout those 6 watersheds. A total of $33 million has been spent out. The governor made an announcement about $6 million up in French Ball last week or week before. Anyway, and then the rest of the money is parsed out to different parts of the next river basin action strategy or the natural infrastructure flood mitigation program. We originally had allocated $10 million from the blueprint for flood natural infrastructure flood mitigation program. It got reduced to $5 million because the legislature took $20 million of the original $96 million. And so we're down to $5 million, but we got an RFP out on the street. It's our pilot RFP for these types of projects. Really excited about it. We had a meeting with potential vendors. So when we put the RFP out, we made it mandatory. You have to come in the office and meet with us on this today. It was actually this morning. So the group was really a big group of people, which we're excited about. You never know what kind of response you're looking at. It looks like we'll get a good response. We had really great questions and great vendor meetings, so we're really excited about that. And the other thing I would say, if you're not familiar with our process, is really the state process, but we certainly follow it stringently here, is those vendors cannot talk about those projects to us until they've submitted those projects. And if you or some group you're associated with are partnering with a vendor, I just remind you, you cannot talk to state employees about those, the DEQ folks about those projects until they're submitted. Just rely on the vendor to guide you through that. They know the process well. But anyway, very excited about that. And we think it will be the first of many to come. In the blueprint, we have recommended annual funding from the general fund to address flood resiliency, not just rely on grants and stuff. And, we gave 2 options, which were, we'll submit projects and, develop a budget, and the legislature can fund those projects directly, or we have an allocated amount, a certain, amount every year that we're always going to get. Who knows what's going to happen with that? But that's the blueprint. And, the governor's office, legislation, all are very involved with coming up with some flood resiliency that is program, the blueprint, and taking on resiliency as a whole, but flood resiliency specifically. So we do anticipate future funding. Natural infrastructure is a very important part of flood resiliency, that's what we focus on in here. But for right now, the 5 million is on the street. Other than that, that's the big update, exciting update. We're excited about it. Can you think of anything else?
Nope, other than what they're about to see. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's it. So,
Any questions?
yeah, are there any questions so far? No hands raised. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
So,
Kevin Tweedy is from EPR. He's principal, aren't you? He owns the joint. I don't know where he went. And his company, I don't know if y'all remember all this, so I'm just giving you a little bit. So EPR was, they were the ones that we selected to build or to work on the Stony Creek pilot project that started, a couple of years ago. So Kevin's just going to give you an update on what's been done, where we are, and what's going on. So thank you, Kevin Tweedy.
Thank you. Happy to be here this afternoon and give you all an update. I'm going to go through these pretty quick. I don't have a lot of slides. Luckily, a lot of them are pictures, but happy to take questions at the end. I worked on the assumption that this group is pretty knowledgeable about the background.
This group that we actually have on the phone, yeah, absolutely.
Showing okay, Sasha?
Yep. I think, yes, most of these people, I'd say all of them are pretty savvy.
Okay, all right. So I didn't spend a lot of time going back. And actually, I do have one little history slide here starting out. Just a little bit of kind of how we got to where we are today, coming in and doing the update. So EPR was selected and contracted in January 2023. And to sum up kind of in big picture capacity, 2023 was kind of modeling, watershed modeling. We did a very detailed model of the entire Stony Creek watershed, which I'll show you a map of in a minute. We did some stakeholder involvement as well. One of those meetings actually went into January 2024, so I'm just kind of lumping here. And we worked on site identification, prioritization, that type of work. So think of 2023 as kind of planning and getting things moving and getting a plan together on how we were going to implement sites, because we've always seen the main goal of this project is to get projects on the ground, not to do studies and that type of thing, although that's an important part of this. So 2024 was developing our mitigation plan. So this contract was structured similarly, I'll say, to the traditional full deliveries that DMS does, but with some differences. But one of those steps was to do a mitigation plan on how we were going to go about this. And then what we've been doing since then is we've been adding supplements to that mitigation plan as we have sites that we're pushing forward. So we had that final mitigation plan in 2024. We worked through negotiations with the community college on the first site that we've implemented. I'll show you that here in just a minute. And started some development of some modeling tools that I am not going to go into because I don't think I'm qualified. Tammy's going to cover that at the end of my presentation. 2025 was actually implementing that community college project, getting everything prepared to do that. We identified a second site that I'll talk about today that we're still working through the process on that, and then continuing to do some tool advancement that really is just now recently started. So that's going to carry into 2026. And then kind of 2026 and beyond is going to be starting our first monitoring on the site at the community college, hopefully implementing the second site, and then hopefully getting started, maybe even implementing a third site and getting started on the third and the fourth site. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're working through that process. So this is a map of the watershed. That red line is the Stony Creek watershed. You can see it's kind of on the city of Goldsboro there, Wayne County, North Carolina. Upper part of the watershed is still somewhat agricultural, although it's got a lot of development pressure on it. And then the lower part of the watershed is the city. Our first site that we chose to implement is that red star there, kind of right in the middle of the watershed, near Wayne Memorial Drive. You'll hear me talk about that a little bit. That's kind of the main thoroughfare that kind of cuts through the watershed. It's got the hospital, it's got the community college, and it has had flooding problems over the years, and it was specifically cited as a focus area in the legislation that appropriated funding for this project. Just pulled this graph out of the mitigation plan that we did for the site. So this is a stormwater constructed wetland project. I'll show you here in just a second. And the whole idea is to capture water that's primarily coming off of the Wayne Community Campus there, Community College campus, and take that steep peak, because it's very high impervious surface, take that peak, knock it off, spread it out, so we retain that water and knock that hydrograph down, so that that water going into Reedy Branch and then ultimately into Stony Creek, and hopefully have some impact, benefit downstream on resilience. Where we are now, earthwork on that structure, that site completed we're still in October, right? Completed this month. We had a walkthrough with the college last Friday. Everything went great. We've still got planting to do. That'll be done probably the end of November, 1st of December in the dormant season. We'll start the monitoring setup work probably next week. Work on getting that instrumentation. So we're going to be monitoring the hydrology of that site. You saw my hydrograph I presented earlier. That was the model prediction of what the site's going to do. We're actually going to implement it with equipment and document what that project is doing is our goal. And that'll be done for, I think, 5 years is our contract monitoring period. And then we'll have as-built and the baseline monitoring document done in December. Okay, so this is the completed site. I believe, I should know this off the top of my head, but I believe it's 9 acres is the catchment area of that stormwater wetland area. You can see the college kind of back there in the back or upper right. That's our primary outlet for the structure. Pretty big drop box there with the skimmers that they were attaching on Friday. So that will allow water to come into that basin, rise up to the level of the top of that outlet before it starts going out. That'll kind of set the normal high pool, and then those skimmers will draw it down over 2 or 3 days to drop that hydrograph limb that I showed you earlier. This is looking on kind of the south side, I guess southeast side. You can see the embankment of the structure coming around, and then back behind that in the shadows of the trees, there's a greenway connector. So we've got a greenway trail that goes along Reedy Branch, which is back in the woods, and then they've got walking trails obviously on the campus as well. And one of the amenities that the college really liked about this project, it was going to provide the opportunity to connect those 2 trails with a greenway connector. So the college is very excited about that, and if you look, you can kind of see that white line back there that they were paving the day that we were there on Friday. In the bottom of that photo, you can see the inlet where the water comes in from the campus. I'll show you a video of that in a minute. It comes into that little kind of stilling basin there, fills up, spreads out, and then is controlled by that outlet structure. Curious to see what it looks like after this week. Sorry, let me go back one. And then you've got an emergency spillway over there on the right side of that photo. So that's some interlocking block that when the water level gets to a certain height, it will release there in like a big tropical system or something like that to keep from breaching over the embankment anywhere else. See if it's going to work. Hey, it works. So that's looking at the college. That's our watershed. That's some current construction that's going on with some buildings they're adding, additional impervious surface. That kind of area of dirt there is some spoil that we brought over from the construction site, and we're able to spoil that on site. You can see the ditch there in the center that drains all of that water to a pipe that goes under the campus drive, and then that comes out on the other side into our constructed wetland at that outlet there that I was showing you earlier. You can see looking back towards the outlet of the project. So it kind of gives you a good flavor of that. So excited to get that one in the ground. It seemed like a long time coming. There were a lot of pieces to get through with that. This was the first project done under this pilot project, first one done for resiliency, so we had to work through things like easement agreements, you know, that had to be tailored for this, so that took some going back and forth. But it's been a good process working with the department.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Just real quick, so, the planting that you're gonna be doing, you've got, I mean, it's, if I remember correctly, it's gonna be kind of some wetlandy, some not wetlandy, and then around, or just on the inner, inside of the,
It'll be the perimeter, the lower perimeter. We don't want to plant the embankment with anything woody.
of course, right, okay, that makes
We're gonna
sense.
have, the colleges agreed they're gonna maintain that just like you would a dam, because that's essentially what it is.
Right.
But on the interior of the project, we're gonna have a combination of herbaceous planting and woody plantings. It's gonna be a mixture, mostly wetland plants, but there are gonna be some fac wet, obligate wet, and then some up to probably facultative that are
Okay.
kind of drier areas, because there will be different areas through the.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, second site is a pond location, an existing pond that we identified up in the upper reaches of the watershed. This is kind of in the headwaters of Stony. This is a site that we're looking at doing a pond retrofit to increase storage of that pond during storm events, and work with the landowners to improve a situation where they're pretty close to a pond breach right now. So they have personal interest in seeing this done as well, if they can get that fixed. So I should say too, with the college, that they agreed to do that first site with us. There was no, payment for land or anything like that. There's going to be no payment of land for this site either. That's probably something we will have to do on some future sites. We've been fortunate so far with the opportunities we've been given, so we're trying to make that money go as far as possible. But here we've got landowners where they will get a benefit out of this because, like I said, their current pond is about to breach. Our landowners, we got two landowners primarily. There's one in the upper part too, but they don't really control the dam. All are verbally on board. We have developed preliminary design concepts, done some modeling of it, and where we're currently at right now is working with dam safety because the size of the dam is going to potentially kick us into an intermediate classification, and we're trying to work with dam safety to dial things in so that we can hopefully get an exempt status. If we have to go intermediate, I think we can work with that. We are going to avoid high hazard. I think we've decided along with DMS, that's probably not where we want to go with these type of projects, is to get into high hazard dam type situations, at least not with this project. So we are working through that process with dam safety. Once we get that understood of where we're going to fall, we can communicate any requirements to the landowner, make sure they are on board, get them contracted, with agreements on board, and move forward with the formal design permit implementation of this site. This is a Google Earth imagery. Don't have any drone shots of this one. Of the pond there kind of in the middle. So the idea is to take the existing dam there that Jonathan's standing on. It's about 5 feet tall, pretty low dam. And what I couldn't get a good picture of is the gully that's cutting up through the old spillway over on the far side because it's it's got so much vegetation on it. But that, probably a few more good storm events and that dam could go. So the landowners want to keep that pond. If they're going to keep it, some significant work is going to have to be done. So it opens the opportunity to rebuild that dam correctly and at a higher height and allow that pond to have a lot more storage for storm events and hold that water higher in the watershed rather than let it shoot all the way down. We've got some opportunities over on the north side to do some excavation out of like littoral shelf, wetland shelves, that type of thing. Which could have some water quality benefits with that as well. That'll help balance some earthwork, so there's some good benefits to doing that. Our goal is to kind of keep the normal pool level about what you see there, but allow it to have much more flooding capacity when the big events come so that it can rise up a good bit more and then release that water over about a 3-day period. Outlet structure that's going to have to be completely redone because it's in rough shape. Okay, looking forward, we've identified a number of different sites around that have potential for doing additional work. I called these sites headwater sites. So what we focused on so far to date has been projects that are not on jurisdictional streams because of the permitting issues and complications that are going to arise from that. Going into where we are now into the next phase of the project, we have some ideas that we're working through of of how maybe we could work on jurisdictional streams and work on larger systems, get more retention, get more bang for the buck. Because what we're seeing is when you're working on these smaller projects up higher in the watershed, once you get down the watershed, the effects are getting drowned out. You're really not getting a whole lot of improvement, you know, as you get further and further away from those practices. So we're trying to look at ways we can get bigger bang for the buck. We've also decided we want to, for any future projects, we want to really focus on Stony Creek above Wayne Memorial Drive. So that's Stony Creek and Howell Branch are the two main tributaries there with some side tributaries. But it's that basically that area got circled in red there. This is one concept we're looking at. Without going too deep down a rabbit hole here, Stony Creek has some interesting topography. So these main stream channels, the larger main stems, have very distinct, very deep valleys. So your agriculture, your development is up on the high terraces, and then they drop down steeply into these floodplains of these creeks, which by and large are wetlands and woody and in pretty good condition. But it opens up an opportunity there if we can provide retention in those valleys and keep that retention from affecting development, existing structures, future structures, agriculture, that type of thing. Seems like there's a big opportunity there to provide that retention and resilience in those areas if we can figure out some of the technical complications to that. So one concept we're looking at with modeling is, you know, basically think of a road crossing without the road. So building an embankment across that valley, that floodplain, to capture that water, and then have a structure at the bottom that at base flow allows free flow through. So you don't get aquatic organisms that are blocked from moving upstream. You don't get some of those permitting concerns that you have with the reservoir. You would have the impact of that embankment, but ideally the impacts up and downstream would be minimal, if not existent. So that's the concepts of 3D kind of visualization of that we're working on. Again, running these models to kind of see, okay, how could we do this? Number one, would it be effective? How effective? And number two, how the heck are we going to design that so that it doesn't blow out in the first big storm and is going to be, you know, sustainable?
So is that big, that white,
I'm sorry.
big, I'm sorry, that thing, that white thing, is that actually supposed to be the stream?
No, sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's the embankment that's built. So that.
Okay, I'm sorry, it was
The
like hard to
purple
tell.
lines there showing your contours. So the valley is kind of running diagonally across there, that flat area.
Right,
And then that's showing that embankment built across there with that little pipe kind of in the middle there that would be on the stream channel. So it's actually not showing.
oh, I see, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it's quick and dirty.
No, that makes sense, thank you.
So we've run a little bit of modeling on that, as I've indicated already. This was a potential location where the topography seemed to lend itself to being able to do that. So this is all conceptual. This is not any kind of agreements or discussion with landowners at this point. This is just looking at technically how would this work and what would the effect be. So you can see Wayne Memorial Drive down there in the bottom of the slide. If we went maybe a mile upstream or so of that and did that, we looked at different berm heights, different outlet configurations, and what we've kind of seen initially is we can get some pretty good reductions in the smaller size storms. You know, as we go up to a bigger berm there on the right of a 10-foot type structure embankment, you know, we're getting reductions at Wayne Memorial of more than a foot, you know, up to the 10-year storm, and then that drops off. Again, we haven't dialed in these numbers yet, but just looking initially at how effective a structure like this might be as compared to doing these more headwater sites that are further removed and having to do maybe many of those sites to get the same type of effect downstream. So,
We have a question online,
okay.
I guess,
Is it written or?
yeah.
If somebody wants to speak up with their question, go ahead. Can't see anybody.
I don't know if Horton can.
It's got a hand raised.
You can read it.
I'll just read it to you. He's joining as a, it says peak shifting like this, if it happens at a watershed scale, can have unintended consequences. Have you given thought to the longer period water will sit on non-participating properties downstream of these projects? I think he's thinking about like hydrologic trespass.
Yeah.
Ish.
have we thought about it so far? The answer is probably no, because we're at kind of this conceptual level, but will we have to think about that with any kind of modeling or specific implementation? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about work potentially in jurisdictional waters. All of these are FEMA mapped. There's going to have to be FEMA permitting that we have to go through. It's going to be a very detailed process to actually implement a concept like this. And that's why we've kind of held off till now to evaluate how could we do it? How would we present it to not just FEMA? I think we can work through them, but how are you going to present it in a 401, 404 context? That type of thing is going to be another issue. Animal for the Corps to kind of bite off on, I think. So we would have to work through that process as well.
I've started warning them.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Mark has too.
Is there time for another question right here with this slide?
Yes.
Okay, this is Noah Parsons. I had this slide right here is great, how it's showing the flooding changes for Wayne Memorial Drive. And this might have been something you've already spoken to that I missed. Is there being consideration given to I guess the additional streets that this project touches holistically, and the structures that are involved, and I guess the time of flooding that's involved with those streets, and what the cost reduction will be to the community from these projects taking place?
Yes. So with the earlier work that we've done already, we've developed a very detailed model of the entire Stony Creek watershed, all of the road crossings and everything. So as we get a specific project site that we want to evaluate in detail, we have the entire watershed model to look at it, put that structure in there, model it, and not only see what happens at the structure footprint and right downstream, but what happens to the entire watershed. So we've got that ability. We haven't gone into that detail with the example I'm showing you here. Again, we're still at the concept level, but we have that very, very detailed ability to go into that and look at all of those different consequences of implementing a practice. And as I think Jeff asked before, making sure we don't get any unintended consequences as a result of implementing something where we actually make flooding worse in another spot, even though we may be improving it in another. So we have done a lot of modeling work. Tammy, I'm giving you your lead in on this watershed. And so in this particular case, we have, I think, a very robust way to look at these projects that we're looking at implementing once we get to the stage where we're ready to look at that. What Tammy's going to be talking about here in a minute is some tools we've been working on to, what do you do when you don't have a super detailed model of your entire watershed? Or because if you're going to have to do that for every single watershed in North Carolina or anywhere you want to do resiliency work, it's a huge cost, a huge investment in time and money to do that. So can we come up with some tools that allow us to make these type of evaluations at a preliminary level quicker and easier and prioritize things better without having to do, a lot of this modeling work that we basically spent a year or two doing. I'll be a lead in on that.
Yeah, is this the end?
That's the end.
Oh, good. Oh, here's Tammy. So I think you might have to unplug,
Yes, probably do.
and then Tammy, you can
Tammy should be able to
share. So just real quick before Tammy starts, as she's getting her stuff together, so Tammy and I especially have been working a lot to not only look at these models and, of course she's been doing the modeling, but to talk about all the implications, what it means, all those kind of things. And one of the actually where this started was because we are going to be using kind of possibly traditional mitigation practices for flood mitigation, those kind of projects, as in wetland, stream, basically nature-based solutions. We, as DMS, we needed to understand what kind of effect or what do those projects currently do for flooding. That was going to give us, we needed that information so that when we do start tracking our progress and our storage. And when we start looking at proposals and comparing them, we need to have some idea. So we, of course, approached EPR, and we asked them to do that. And of course, like most wonderful people, really smart people, they kind of took that effort and expanded it to where it is now. So Tammy is really, so we gave you, in fact, Tammy and I both presented to y'all back in, I think, April. This is kind of the second part of what we had been talking about, where it just goes into the tool. And I'll let Tammy go. I just wanted to give you a little background. I'm hoping that y'all remember this from, I know, a long time ago, 6 months ago.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I share my video? So if you're not just speaking to the screen, or is this fine?
Fine, whichever way you want to do it.
Okay. So just a reminder about Stony Creek Watershed Model. It's about 28 square miles. There are several sub-watersheds within it, and we did some nature-based solution testing and modeling within the Reedy Branch sub-watershed, which is the green area on the screen. Let's see. Some of the NBS practice types that we looked at included 3 types of stream restoration, riparian wetland restoration, constructed wetland with various runoff volume captures that we were targeting, and then buffer restoration. And from that modeling, we realized that there was a relationship between the practice area footprint, so of a project that you were going to implement, and the drainage area that was coming in. Like this relationship popped out for each of these different types of practices. And from that, we thought, is there a way that we can do some predicting, develop a tool to predict peak flow reduction, which can be translated to a water surface elevation reduction without doing the detailed modeling, just like Kevin was talking about, for every single site that we want to evaluate. And so from that previous modeling, we came up with a site-specific tool where you could look at the individual site, see what could be fit in that site, and then look at the percent reduction in peak flow at the outlet of that site, as well as a spot or a location downstream of interest of, well, if we put the practice here, what does it do to the flooding downstream at this location? And then using the same basically equations, we also came up with a preliminary tool to estimate, well, if we have a target sites, like for instance, Wayne Memorial Drive, and we want to reduce the water surface elevation at that location by, half a foot, what kind of peak flow reduction is needed to hit that target? And can we sort of back into how many or how much nature-based solution practice is going to be required upstream of it in order to hit those targets? And so that's where we were. I presented on that last time, those preliminary tools. And so since then, we've continued some more modeling to not only look at one individual practice at a time or one type of practice at a time, but also looking at multiple practices at a time in series and also in multiple subbasins. So that's the piece I'm going to present today, is what that preliminary modeling for multiple basins is showing. So just a couple of things to remember when we're looking at the tool to date is that one of our assumptions is that any drainage area where we're going to put a practice is going to be a half a square mile or less. Our big watershed model for Stony Creek, all of our subbasins within that watershed are approximately a half a square mile or less. And that was because we knew that we were looking at sites that are not going to have a huge watershed coming into them for these kinds of practices. I think I showed some of these. I know I showed these at our presentation at the conference, and I think something similar to this last time, but essentially a couple of things that you need to run this part of the tool is you need to know the drainage area of the where you're going to put a project. So this maximum drainage area of the practice site that you're going to put in. So in this case, I put in a half a square mile. That's like the max. And then you also need to know what is the drainage area of the site that you're looking at downstream of your practice. So in this case, this is an example of a site that has a drainage area downstream of the practice we're going to put in of 4 square miles. And then it runs through the equations to spit out, the total number of acres that would be required of each kind of MBS practice for the targets that you selected at that downstream site. So in this case, we're looking at a reduction of half a foot through 1.25 feet. And then what does that mean? So in order to get this half a foot reduction, we need a reduction of 22.5% in peak flow at this site. I did some just backing in, well, what does that kind of mean? So it basically says that we need to take the 100-year flow down to about a 52-year flow to get a half a foot reduction. And then for a target, what does that mean in terms of what kind of volume do we need to capture in order to get that reduction? So that's what these numbers mean. And there's some upfront hydraulics and estimating that you need to do at your site. I used existing HEC-RAS models at the location to determine and estimate these numbers in here. So the second thing that it does is not only give you the acreage of the footprint that you would need, like the total acreage that you would need, but it also gives you the opportunity to sort of play with the dimensions of your practice footprint. So you can adjust the width of the stream restoration footprints and the buffer restoration footprints, and it will tell you, well, if you have a 200-foot wide corridor, then you'll need approximately 11,643 linear feet of priority 1 stream restoration to hit a half a foot reduction in water surface elevation at the downstream target location. For riparian wetland, you plug in an acreage and it spits out how many practices of that size acreage you would need to hit these targets. So in this case, I plugged in 43 acres. We would need 16 43-acre riparian wetland sites to hit this half a foot target. And then the same thing for constructed wetlands. You can adjust the depth of your constructed wetland, an average footprint in acres of your site, and then it estimates the storage, and then how many practices of that size would be required to hit these targets. So that's where we were when I last presented, was this level of sophistication in the tool. Since then, we have been looking at, well, how can we look at multiple types, not just one type? And does our tool predict well enough for planning purposes to use it instead of having to model all these different scenarios that we might want to look at? And so we had completed some additional modeling to evaluate the trends to see if they're linear or not. And we also did some multiple practice combinations and then compared it with the tool predictions. And we did a couple of different variations of modeling. We did some modeling in our hypothetical Reedy Branch watershed, but we also did some modeling out in the Stony Creek real watershed to see how well the tool predicted outside of the hypothetical situation. And so I just want to show you what I mean by that. So, Reedy Branch was our hypothetical MBS watershed where we did all of our modeling. And so we wanted to see, okay, what if we did, a couple of different practices in a couple of different subbasins? Will our tool predict well compared to the model? So we modeled, in this case, a constructed wetland here, a priority 2 stream restoration here, and then a priority 3 further up in the watershed here. And this is a graphical representation of the results. Some people like graphs, some people like tables. So I have a table for table people. But this basically is showing, so for priority 3, which was the first practice, the most upstream practice, the tool predicted a reduction in peak flow of 7.9%, whereas the model actually predicted a larger reduction than the tool. Further down in the watershed, we have the constructed wetland in the priority tool, or priority 2, and the tool predicted about 14%, and the modeling predicted about 12. So they're pretty close. And then as you move downstream from the practices, we're looking at the different junctions in the model to see at this location how well is the tool predicting versus the model. And it did pretty good in the hypothetical watershed. And then if you want to see this is the same data, but in a table format. So here we are upstream in the most upstream subbasin where our priority 3 was located. The tool predicted a 7.1 CFS change, which is equivalent to about an 8% reduction, versus the model predicted 30 CFS and a 34. So there was quite, like, the tool under predicted for priority 3 at this location. But as you move down and you look at when we bring in the constructed wetland and the priority 2, along with the priority 3, we start getting these numbers converging and not being as different. The tool actually predicted really well compared to the modeling from that point down. So that's great. Let's see how it does in the Stony Creek watershed itself. So what we did is we modeled a priority 3 in sorry, I don't know why that, I don't know if y'all can see that. I'm trying to get rid of this. I don't know what that is. Okay. We modeled a priority 3 up in the House Branch subwatershed here. And just for reference, Wayne Memorial Drive is right here. So we put in a priority 3 project here. We put in a priority 2 stream restoration further upstream in the Stony Creek watershed. And then we modeled a constructed wetland down a little bit closer to Wayne Memorial Drive in this subbasin here. And those results are here. So the priority 3, again, under predicted compared to the model way up in the upper watershed of House Branch. But I want you to just kind of just note the magnitude of flows that we're talking about as well. And then when we get to the table, you'll see that even better. And then as you move downstream, the numbers aren't as, they're pretty close in terms of statistical predicting between the model and the HMS model. And then here's our priority 2. It over predicted for the priority 2, the tool did, compared to the modeling in this case. And then the constructed wetland was pretty right on with its prediction with the tool versus the model. And then here's Wayne Memorial Drive, and our tool, adding up all of the reduction benefits from all 3 of these is predicting basically no change at Wayne Memorial, but negative 2.6. And then the actual HMS model shows a slight increase, but for modeling, it's basically 0. And then that's trend is the same all the way down the basin to the outlet of the basin. And so going to the table version of the results, it's showing the same thing. So again, up here where the priority 3 is located, our base flow, or our, not base flow, existing flow for Stony Creek is only 26 CFS to begin with. So the tool predicted 1 CFS change, whereas the model predicted 3. So 4.5 versus 10.9 isn't as far off as it sounds when you have magnitudes this low of flow. And anyway, you can read, maybe you can't, maybe you can read some of these values as you go on down. This is where the constructed wetland predicted, the tool predicted 17 CFS reduction, whereas the model only predicted 6. Again, the flow at that location was only 72 CFS to begin with. So, and that is where we have, that's where we're at so far. And we are getting ready to start some more. We feel like we need to do a lot more testing before we say, yes, our tool's great or it's not great. So what we're getting ready to do is do some more modeling within Stony Creek watershed. We're going to look at 30 sites that will include multiple practice types, and just we're going to model and then see what our tool is predicting, and then do some assessment on, is there, if it's predicting well, if it's not predicting as well as we want, is there anything that we can do to improve the tool. And then one other thing that we're going to do is look at a site outside of Stony Creek watershed and do basically the same thing, model a practice type and use the tool to predict what the tool says it would be versus what the actual modeling results are, and see how well it does outside of Stony Creek. And one of the assumptions for that is that we're going to pick a watershed that is similar to the Stony Creek watershed in terms of hydrogeographic and that is similar type of watershed. We wouldn't want to try to use this. I don't think these values would do well at all, like in a mountainous situation, for instance. So that is where we are to date. That is all I have. So if anybody has any questions, I still don't know how to get rid of that. So I'm just going to leave it. And I cannot see if anybody has questions.
Yeah,
So,
we're looking,
okay.
or none. I will also add that on the second kind of testing level, we're basically going to do like 30 kind of random combinations of practices. And the reason we're choosing 30 is just because that's just a good statistical number if you're looking for like if you're looking for a good linear relationship between your model and your tool. That's why we chose 30. And we're going to just see where that gets us. The whole reason that we just want to do one more step is we like for DMS, we need to have some idea of like an error, so that if we're evaluating something or using the tool to do, some task, that we know, what kind of error that we might be, we might be seeing. So that's part of the reason, and those are our next steps. Y'all have any questions?
I do have one.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just curious with regards to the tool itself. What is the process of development in terms of the code that you have been using and the background? Whether it is something that's close to the HMS, or is it something that's a little bit different? So I was just curious, Tammy, if she had any knowledge on that.
Well, when I say tool, we're basically talking spreadsheets at this point. Like it's a very,
Okay.
I would say it's a pretty robust spreadsheet, but it's not in any sort of proprietary modeling or coding package or anything like that. It's spreadsheet level at this point. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Anybody else? Ooh. Okay. Well, thank you, Tammy. That was excellent.
Yeah, no worries.
That was really
Hand
good.
raised.
Thanks.
Oh, who had a question? Who's that? Oh, Adam.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is Adam Gold, standing in for Will McDowell at EDF. I was wondering, Tammy, if you could talk a little bit more about, I guess, like the formula or like the functions within the spreadsheet. You mentioned that you derived that from like an existing HEC-RAS model. Just be curious about kind of the theoretical underpinnings of that. Thanks.
Oh, okay. So when I was talking about the RAS model, that was for your site of interest when we were, trying to figure out what our targets are. So basically, you have a HEC-RAS model, you have either a cross-section or structure, and you can pull out the hydraulic information about and get, basically water surface elevation versus discharge rate curves from that. And for Stony Creek, we have some flow versus volume curves as well that we've developed. And so that's how I was able to get the information from HEC-RAS essentially at the site of interest in that one slide that I showed. So it wasn't anything super complicated. It was just data. It's just data that you can pull from RAS, or at least pull out the rating curves and figure out if I have a half a foot drop, what is that? What is the water surface elevation at that, at that cross section for that? What is the flow? And then what is that what is the volume that goes with that flow? So it was pretty simple. It wasn't very complicated to do that. So that's for that piece. Now, as far as like the equations that are in the spreadsheet tool itself for predicting percent reduction for each of the practice area types, that is that practice area footprint over drainage area relationship that fell out of the detailed modeling that we did previously. That is like a whole nother presentation to go over how that was done and how those are being used. But that basically it's kind of like I don't know how regression equations for each type of practice type that are used to do the prediction. And so hopefully that's answers your question.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, and I've been talking to Tammy quite a bit about that footprint of drainage area. And I think I understand it, but the biggest thing I think that's interesting about it is that it's not a simple calculation. I mean, you can't just, okay, the footprint in is going to be 4 acres and the drainage area is, apparently it does not work like that. And what I think is interesting, and I don't know for sure, but when I've seen other presentations where they're using that, I'm not sure that they're calculating that the same way that Tammy is. And I trust, I'm definitely a little biased. I think Tammy's right. But, but anyway, it's just interesting.
I mean, if you want, I can pull up a slide from our econ presentation that has those trend lines essentially that will show, where the equations came from. We can do that real quick if we have time.
Yeah, if we got, just a couple minutes.
Okay, let me share this.
So just what she started with, so Tammy and I presented all of this, we did a joint presentation at the STREAM conference this past August, where we talked about the program and why we needed this and all the uses, and then kind of jumped into the, the modeling stuff. And
Yeah.
We had some really good feedback.
Yeah, so this is just one of the slides that shows this practice area over drainage relationship
It's not
plotted
shared.
against. Oh,
It's not
it's
shared.
not being shared? Oh, sorry, here. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. So on the bottom, we have that ratio of practice footprint area over cumulative drainage area, and then on the y-axis is the percent change in peak flow. And so this is the relationship that popped out when we looked, where we're evaluating the results from the MBS modeling, and it was pretty exciting to see such a nice straight lined relationship. And it also held for the 2, 10, and 100. The only thing that shifted was the magnitude of the percent change in peak flow. So that's the relationship that's driving the equations in our MBS tool. So that should explain everything, right? So
To me, I'm just kidding.
So, and we have other, I have other plots that include more data than just these. This is just the stream restoration, priority 1, 2, constructed wetland, one of the constructed wetland, and then the buffer restoration, because it gets pretty messy if you try to put every single one that we modeled on there. So this is just like a sampling of the practices that we modeled in the results. But all of them, even the ones that aren't on here, have this linear relationship between PA over DA. It's just the slopes are different for each of the practices, and then the magnitude of the change in peak flow changes for the 2, 10, and 100. So, but the trends hold. So kind of neat.
Yes.
So
think one thing, it's probably evident to everybody on this call, but one obvious conclusion out of all of this stuff is we're not gonna undo 200 years of land development with
No.
one or two practices going into a watershed. I think that's quite obvious, but what we're trying to do now is quantify what does that look like if we do want to undo some amount of that harm that's, or that, reduce that flooding, and then we could go down a rabbit hole there with the continued development that's going on in a lot of these watersheds too. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that was one of the, I think even before, when everything started, we were all having those conversations. And that was one of the goals of the modeling was to, at least for the program, was to set up realistic expectations. And I think that's what this is giving us. Yeah.
I think another conclusion is there's no magic bullet. There's a lot of tools in the toolbox, and it's going to take a lot of those tools being implemented, along with some things that were not in the scope of our project. Right. Look at, infrastructure improvements, stormwater ordinance changes.
Say rule changes. Yes, absolutely. Any more questions before we move on to Celso? All good? Okay. So, okay. Thank you, Tammy.
No worries, thanks.
Yeah, apparently you can just do what you need. Yep. You know what you're doing.
I hope so. Let's see.
So y'all, so Celso is, I've been working with Celso at NC State for many years, actually. We've done a lot of projects together. Celso's just done a ton of work, he's, with water resources, with engineering, with sediment, with water, I mean, all kinds of different transport. He's done a lot of work. In fact, currently, he does a lot of work with DOT. In fact, he knows Brian. Yes, all the fun. And so, I guess, in the midst of all the conversations that Celso and I have had over the years, I have always expressed concern over sediment when it comes to especially stream restoration. In this case, when it comes to flooding, I just think that concern or that need to understand is heightened, because if we start doing flood resilience projects, a lot of them on the coast or anywhere where we've got any kind of sediment load. On the coast, we get sand, basically everything's sand. It's just different sizes of sand and maybe some clay, and it moves most of the time. We need to have an understanding of how that sediment is going to behave, or we need to plan for how that sediment being in those systems in a design. Otherwise, we're just going to end up with a big mess, basically. I mean, that's just the simplest way. And so Celso and I started, we've been talking about this forever, but we started talking about like how we might implement something to figure that out. And in that process, we got DOT involved because we were having conversations with them. And so Brian is on the line. We've had some of our conversations have, involved him and Matt Waffer. Anyway, so Celso's here to tell you what we're going to do, and I don't think we're going to go past. I mean, you've already started working on this, yes. Yeah. But we're not going to go into too much technical, like really, really technical detail, because we don't want to blow your minds. Yeah.
I will auto-invite myself for a future meeting.
Yes, there you go. That's fine too. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Torian. And I know most of you in the room and some of you online. But I'm Celso Castro Linaga. I'm an associate professor at NC State. And Sperian said today we're gonna talk about sediment. And primarily what I want to achieve with this presentation is two things. First, to give you like a very big overview of why we're pursuing this project. And secondly, give you an overview of what we plan to achieve. If you have questions about more specific details, I'm always happy to talk about that, but I meet frequently with Perian, and part of these interactions and my interactions with Perian is to actually bring this to practice and implementation at the end. And part of that connection with NCDOT took us to the mountains. So this is a picture actually of the Sonanoa River that we took right before Equestream. The Sonanoa was supposed to be a more gravelly river, but we found a lot of sand basically paving this river after Helene. So that's part of the motivation and part of what we're going to be looking at during the project. So I'm going to move around for those that are online. So if you cannot hear me, I'll be, come back to the computer. But the premise of the project that we're pursuing is that sediment transport and in general channel adjustment is typically overlooked when determining flood hazard maps. And the idea is that if you consider this illustration from a recent paper that was published in Geomorphology, so if you really want the nitty-gritty about these effects, I'm happy to send you this reference. You can basically think about a pre-flood channel, then what type of morphodynamic adjustments will happen during the flood, and then how the post-flood channel will look. And the whole idea of sediment transport is that rivers are always moving, are always adjusting. The problem is when these levels of adjustment are pronounced, and then it will basically change the function of that stream. So what you can see are two examples. The one on the top, a river that will basically inside or will erode this bed and then suffer bank erosion, so it will become wider. And then in the bottom, a river that will deposit sediment on its bed and then it will aggregate. And both of those adjustments, that again are natural and will happen under different events, will change the flood stage for a particular discharge. So basically it will change how much water and how much sediment a particular river can move under a particular circumstance. So with this in mind, what we set up with this project is to address two specific challenges, all right? The first challenge is how to make restoration more resilient against floods. And then the second challenge is how to implement river restoration in a future that is unlike the past. And here are two pictures. The one on the top is the same Sonanoa River, but upstream close to Sonanoa. And this river looks at this location completely different to how it looks close to Asheville. And we were in the tour with Rankin, and it's actually doing consulting work for NCDOT. And we all agree that this is what at least a resilient system should look like when moving and transporting sediment. And then the picture on the bottom is actually from Cross Creek at Fayetteville during Storm Debbie. And we're reaching out to the city of Fayetteville, and I'm gonna put Byron on the spot. I reach out to him because we're trying to also target one of the sites close to the coastal plains. All right, so I'll walk you through the two challenges very quickly to again highlight a little bit more the motivation of what we're doing this, and then I move on into what we're specifically doing in this project. So as all of you in this room know, river restoration involves changes in river platform shape. So that means that you are going to have impacts on the sediment transport capacity and in the flow conveyance capacity. So you are going to undoubtedly affect how much sediment, how much water can be moved. And I'm going to show you the case of Richland Creek in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of the restoration design, but this is part of that first interaction that I had with DMS and Perian back in 2018. We started working together. Yes. But beyond the specifics of what we're looking at this project, what I want you to know is that we had the opportunity to measure two different geometries, and we also had the design. So we have an opportunity to evaluate what was the impact of a large event that happened between what we call the post-restoration geometry, about 8 years after the restoration began, and then what we call a post-hurricane geometry 3 months afterwards, after Hurricanes Florence and Hurricane Michael. So what I'm showing you in the screen are on the top are 3 different cross sections, and this is for a paper that the student involved in that work published in 2023. So what you see on the top are three cross sections along that creek, and then you have the design geometry in yellow, the post-restoration geometry in the red dotted line, and then the post-hurricane geometry in blue. And then what you have at the bottom is just an indication of how water conveyance has changed with these 3 geometries, so that you will see on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis is the applied shear stress, or the force that the water is exerting on the boundaries of the channel. And I'm going to ask you to focus on the cross-section that is towards the left, so basically cross-section A. And what you can see here is that the channel has actually incised and widened from the design to the post-restoration and then to the post-hurricane. But if you look at that same plot A on the bottom, if you look at the proximity between the red triangle and the yellow dot, what you see is that even though that stream has changed, the actual sediment transport capacity or water conveyance and applied force hasn't really changed that much, right? So there is a geomorphic change, but the function is still the same. However, if you look at how far away the red dot, the blue square is, you see that after those 3 months that it took us to measure the new geometry, what you see is that the applied shear stress increases. So now for that configuration, the water will exert actually a higher force on the boundaries of the channel. And then for the same depth, you're actually reducing how much water it can take. And this is just to show you the impact of how 2 floods can have on the function of this channel, and why it is important to understand sediment transport dynamics in the context of flood mitigation and flood hazards. So as I illustrate with this example, floods have the capacity to erode sediment and transport, sediment, and then can lead to strong changes in channel geometry and behavior. And what we want to do is take these 2 factors into account and then tap into a topic that is old in geomorphology, which is the topic of dynamically stable channels. So it's basically understanding what is that equilibrium shape of a river that is actually actively transporting sediment and that can erode the banks. So what we see in reality, moving beyond these concepts of threshold channels or channels that will not move under any conditions. All right, and then the second challenge is river restoration under changing conditions. Right? So how do we account for the variability that we expect to see in the future? So typically we apply the deterministic models, and here what I mentioned, what I'm referring to is just the fact that we tend to do modeling in the sense that we have one input, one output, and then that's the value that we take for assessment or for design. And what happens with deterministic modeling is that it typically assumes stationarity, and it tends to don't capture the variability and the uncertainty of future events. And for that, I'm going to show you the case of riverbank erodibility parameters, also building on that work that we pursue with Perian since we started and collaborated. And what you see on the screen is the only equation that I have on the presentation, but this is the excess shear stress equation, and it's what models like PSTEM from USDA and HEC-RAS uses for predicting bank erosion. And what the equation does is basically calculate a difference between the applied force and the resisting force, and then based on that, it calculates an erosion rate over a given time. And in particular, I want you to focus on the 2 red parameters, the critical boundary shear stress to your right. That's the maximum force that we can have in the channel before erosion starts. And then the erodibility coefficient is most related to the rate. So once sediments start moving, then how fast it will move as the flow continues to increase. So this data set that you're seeing in the screen is actually building upon that and through a recently funded WRI project with the city of Raleigh. What we did for this project is that we selected 3 sites, 2 along Crabtree Creek and 1 in Walnut Creek. And then we consistently went to those sites about once every 2 weeks to measure how stream bank erodibility was changing relative to hydroenvironmental conditions, specifically moisture content, temperature, and electrical conductivity. So it's the same location, the same bank, just repeated erodibility testing. And what you see in these 2 plots on the left is the moisture content variability that we measure every time that we went to the site across over a year. And then what you see on the right is the variability on that critical force, right? That maximum force that we can exert before erosion. And I'm going to ask you to focus on 2 banks, the one on the far left and the one on the far right. So if you see the one on the far left, what you notice is that we didn't really experience a lot of changes in moisture content variability, but we did have a significant change in the variability of the critical shear stress, right? So depending on where you go, even for relatively small changes in moisture content, your shear stress can be as low as 1 Pascal or it can be close to 6 Pascal. And depending on the storm that is acting, that can be triggered or no of erosion. And then if I show you the opposite effect, if you see the site to the far right, so this is in Walnut Creek, what you see is that that side we saw a lot of variability in moisture content, so it was located higher on the bank face. And then we didn't see a lot of variability in the critical shear stress, right? So basically the opposite. And of course, I'm not gonna go into details, but the driver of this variability is how the flow interacts with the material, right? The texture of the Walnut Creek bank is more sandy, while the fabric of the bank at Capture Creek is much more finer. So you have more clay that will basically interact differently with the water. But the takeaway is that these solubility parameters that are typically considered to be dependent on the soil, they will change with hydroenvironmental conditions. So they will not be static, but would rather be dynamic parameters that we need to consider in the models. So when you consider a bank like the one you see here, and you consider the effect of different storms, and the one I'm showing here are the Helene on the top, measured at Biltmore in the Sonoma River, and then from a gauge in Cross Creek, the tropical storm Debbie. And the implication is that the form of this hydrograph will have a say, together with the material in the banks, in dictating how susceptible that stream is to erosion, right? So if you have a long dry period and then you have a big storm, the bank will behave differently than if you have subsequent events that may not be a tropical storm Helene level, but you may have significant erosion just driven by small events that happen very frequently. And this is something that right now we are not able to account in mainstream models. So the argument here is that we need non-deterministic modeling, and by this what I mean is that we need predictions that are probabilistic, so talking about exceedance rates or probabilities of exceedance. And for that, we're focusing on performance-based approach. And the idea here is not that we are developing a new model, but it's how we're using current models that work into understanding how can we treat rivers as dynamic entities. So under all possible considerations, what will be the probability of observing a particular event? So with that in mind, the premise of this work is that resiliency against flow hazards can actually be improved by considering a dynamic adjustment of river channels. And this is a figure from the same paper that I mentioned. And you can see here that there are many things that we are not accounting for in this project, but there are many things that we are, right? Especially related with sediment. And you can see long-term drivers like climate hydrology and land use transformation, but you can also see some of the short-term factors that we discussed, such as previous flood, in-channel sediment, or bank erosion, among others. So with that, we're going to be pursuing 3 research objectives over the next 3 years. The first one is the more theoretically based objective, which is to develop analytical models for the equilibrium shape of channels that can move sediment and that can erode its banks. The second one is to determine the impact of varying water discharges and sediment loads on that trajectory of adjustment. So what is that interaction between material and water flow? And then the third one will be to incorporate these two into a performance-based approach that can help us to quantify flood risk in a probabilistic sense. So I'm going to walk you very briefly through the motivation behind the 3 research questions, and then I'll conclude with how these 3 things are connected, at least in our minds now, and then when you invite me back again, I'll show you how they are connected in reality, and then see how far I was. So the research objective 1, again, has to do with the equilibrium geometry of dynamically stable channels. And again, this is a problem that is all in geomorphology, but we are interested in knowing how will a channel look like depending on the flow regime that is coming into the channel and depending on the material that you have. So whether you have sand or gravel or so forth. So we're interested in understanding how all of these different movements that are basically controlling the rate of channel adjustment and the rate of applied force. And this is a video that I took on our very first visit to a site in Millstone Creek.
West Fork.
Yes. Millstone Creek in Ramseur.
Oh, Millstone.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Sorry, forgot.
that's I think the water depth that day was about 10 centimeters. The banks are about 6 feet high. Mm-hmm. You can find that sand on the floodplains, and even under those very low conditions, sand was still moving, and you have bed fronts that are basically controlling the roughness, right? And the idea here is to give you, to highlight that, as Priya mentioned at the beginning, sand will always be moving. So trying to get to that geometry of dynamic channels that don't consider sediment movement is actually a problem for some of these systems. And then how these interactions are extrapolated when you have more important flow events, then will control how these channels will continually adjust. So the idea is that we, with this research objective in particular, we're going to arrive at design equations that account for these dynamic factors, right? So this will be, in theory, how the channel should look like if the channel is made out of certain materials under a certain flow rate. The second objective we're going to be looking, and this is more a numerical and field work oriented objective, to look at the spatiotemporal variability of river adjustment. And here, basically, what we want to understand is that if you have different characteristics of river channels, right? And here I'm showing you 3 examples from different projects. So the one on, if I go clockwise, the one on the top right corner, that's one of the sites for the Raleigh project. So the Captree Creek, right downstream of Homestead Park. The one next to it is a non-tributary to West Fork in Kernersville. That was also one of the visits that we did a few years back.
Oh, right.
With Alexis and Grant. And then this is the Swananoa River that I showed you at the beginning. So the idea is that these 3 rivers, even if they have the same flow coming in, will react differently, right? Based on what we have talked about, what is the mobility of that bed material, what is the composition of that bank. You can see that both in Captree and especially in the Orne tributary, the banks do not have any vegetation, but you can see the amount of vegetation that you have from the Swananoa. So all of that will influence what will be really the main sediment transport mode, and then what will be the trajectory of adjustment. And then if you combine this with the flow duration curve, and this is just a representation of what is the time that a particular flow spends in the channel. The 2 figures that I have right here are from a paper that was published in 2020, and this is the Minnesota River. And the reason why they are able to do this is because they have a long record of flow discharges in the Minnesota. But what I want you to see on the bottom right corner is how the probability of exceedance has changed over time, right? So flows that are now, that are larger are much more frequent now, or they have a higher probability of being exceeded in a particular year, as we have seen even here in this area recently. So the third objective, the idea is to take the theoretical approach for the design equations, to combine that with what is actually happening in the field at the sites that we select, and then basically use the different scenarios that consider variability in climate and land use transformation, for example, like sediment supply, and then understand what will be the most likely trajectory of the river if this were to happen, right? We talk about the Swananoa. Helene was an event that was significant, that primarily caused that river to widen and to move plenty of sediment. And that river will have, because of that event, a different trajectory of adjustment that I will expect to happen, for example, in the coast or in Captree or in any other river that we have worked. So this is more about looking forward in the future. So coming back to the 3 questions, what we expect to achieve at the end is to combine design equations that can be used separately for stream restoration with river adjustment duration curves that basically allows you, similar to what we do with bank erosion, that allows you to understand what will be the trajectory of adjustment of this particular river, given these conditions in the flow and this material. And then those 2 objectives will basically contribute towards more of the probabilistic approach. Like if we set a series of scenarios inside this probabilistic engine, then what is the probability of exceedance of certain events in the future? So we are going to be pursuing this project through the lens of 2 sites. One side, it's the Swananoa River. So actually we selected 2 different locations in the Swananoa. One that is upstream, that's the one that you see on the top picture, close to Swananoa. It's actually in a camping site, so it's very easy to access, waitable, and you can reach it. And you can see here that the banks are not as tall, and you see gravel basically and relatively large particles in the bed. And then the picture in the bottom is the Swananoa downstream, close to where it crosses the Blue Ridge Road.
Right, yeah, Blue Ridge Road.
And this is a section that the banks are vegetated. You could see a little bit of erosion in the toes. And then it was paved with sand, but we do not expect that to be the case once we basically determine the material underneath. And then the second site we're hoping it will be located within the city of Fayetteville. We're actively trying to select a site. And the idea is that with these 2 selections, we're going to capture conditions that are very different, right? Mountain streams that are steeper and coarser in their material, with streams in the coast that are more frequently subjected to large events and that are likely going to be finer and are going to move differently. So in these sites, we're going to start conducting field measurements by the end of the year, and these are going to be measurements that are going to be repeated. So we're going to be characterizing channel cross-section, streamline credibility, installing a fiber optic distributed temperature sensing device that will allow us to understand not only the elevations in the channel bed, but the material gradation towards the bottom, and conducting measurements of flow velocity with an ADCP. So we're going to generate, in addition to the project, a good amount of data that can hopefully serve outside of this for anybody that is interested in using it. So that was a very quick overview. Again, this is a lot of promises in a sense of what we're going to do. But we're excited about tackling this difficult problem, and most importantly, to contribute to the efforts that DMS is doing. So if you have any questions, you can ask me now, or that's my email address.
Actually, yeah, you can either, you can email me, or you can, yeah, sure, ask Celso
Yeah.
directly, that's fine. Yeah.
That's a good question. Thank you, Professor. So I just, you mentioned briefly about the stochastic modeling or probabilistic modeling that you get into at the end.
Yes.
In terms of that model specifically, what kind of methods are you anticipating to use? For example, Monte Carlo simulation, or maybe Markov chain models that can help you kind of enhance that probabilistic model and reduce the degree of error eventually. Is that something that you anticipate using?
Yeah, so for the engine, we're using actually the HEC-RAS 2D
Okay.
so as the base. And then the framework that we're using for the simulations is following the probabilistic seismic hazard analysis that they use in earthquake engineering. So it's based on the total probability theory. So it's more of our repeated simulations that we're doing with the model. And the challenge that we're facing now is how to apply that model multiple times.
Kind of like the Monte Carlo one, where you,
Basically, yeah.
where you have randomness.
Yes, and answer. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, that was great, thank you. I wanted to, like, to the board members, given what you've seen today, all three of, everything that we've shown, they're absolutely related. You know, it might not seem as much, you know, Celso stuff related to EPRs, but it will, I think it will show itself shortly. If anybody on the call of the advisory board, if you want to like talk about this anymore, if you want to talk about, you know, maybe if you've got some ideas about, you know, how we, you know, the direction we might want to go in terms of implementing some of these, you know, some of these kind of tools, and then this research. I mean, you know, I have a lot, many ideas. I've talked to Mark. Mark's got several ideas, but it would be really great, and of course, Kevin and Tammy and Celso do. It would be really great though if any of you want to, I don't know, get together, talk. We would really appreciate it. It's been really difficult to try to figure out how to keep everybody on the board involved, other than to update you. And I think that might be a really good place to start if we can. I don't know. I mean, we can just have a separate meeting just to discuss. So anyway, because all the people on the phone are like right up there. You know, you're all, yeah, you're like, everybody's got exactly the kind of experience that we need to have, you know, these conversations. So anyway, I'm just putting that out there. Just email me, let me know. And of course, feel free to email Celso, or I guess, you know, you don't mind either. Nope. You can contact any of these people directly if you want more specific information. Any questions? Are y'all good? Can y'all at least give me a thumbs up? Not even that. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Byron. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you all.